The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Not through a lawyer. Not through the mail. They arrived in front of nearly 200 employees. The room had been prepared for a company celebration. Managers gathered around round tables. Department heads exchanged smiles. Executives discussed quarterly results. And then everything changed. Ethan Cole stood near the back of the room wearing a simple gray maintenance uniform. Most people barely noticed him. To them, he was just another hardworking employee responsible for keeping the building running. His wife noticed him. And so did the man standing beside her. Jessica Cole walked confidently toward the center of the room, holding a folder in one hand and the arm of Richard Hale in the other. Richard was the company's celebrated CEO. Powerful, wealthy, admired. At least on the surface. The conversation slowly died as people sensed something unusual unfolding. Jessica stopped directly in front of Ethan. The smile on her face carried no warmth. Only certainty. Only superiority. Without hesitation, she placed the divorce papers on the nearest table and informed him that their marriage was over. The room fell silent. Not the normal kind of silence. The dangerous kind. The kind that appears when people realize they are witnessing someone else's humiliation. Ethan looked down at the papers. 3 years of marriage. Gone. Just like that. Jessica made it clear that she was tired of struggling financially. She explained that she wanted more from life. More opportunities. More luxury. More status. Then she revealed the part that truly shocked everyone. She was leaving Ethan for Richard. The CEO. Gasps echoed through the room. Several employees exchanged uncomfortable glances. Others immediately reached for their phones. Nobody expected what happened next. Jessica wrapped her arm around Richard and proudly announced that she had found someone who could finally give her the life she deserved. The words hit Ethan harder than the divorce papers. Not because of the betrayal. Because of the way she said it. As if the years they had spent together meant nothing. As if he had been a mistake she was finally correcting. Richard appeared amused by the entire situation. The CEO made no effort to hide his satisfaction. He looked at Ethan the same way someone might look at an obstacle already removed from the road. Several managers laughed nervously. Others looked away. Nobody stepped forward. Nobody defended Ethan. Jessica signed the final page, then pushed it toward him. The humiliation was complete. At least, that was what everyone believed. Because none of them knew something. Something that would eventually destroy everything Jessica and Richard thought they had built. Something Ethan had spent years keeping secret. Something connected to the company itself. Something connected to ownership. But that truth remained hidden. For now. Ethan calmly picked up the papers. He signed them. No argument. No scene. No desperate attempt to save the marriage. That reaction confused Jessica. She expected tears. She expected begging. She expected anger. Instead, she got silence. The kind of silence that reveals nothing. The kind that hides everything. And as she walked away with Richard, believing she had won, she never noticed the elderly man standing near the exit. A man who had watched the entire event. A man whose expression had changed the moment he saw Ethan sign those papers. A man who understood something nobody else did. His name was Victor Lang, and he had just become the first witness. What happened next would change all of their lives. Months earlier, Ethan Cole had been the kind of man most people overlooked. He worked long hours, avoided attention, never complained, never boasted. Most employees believed he lived an ordinary life. That assumption was exactly how Ethan preferred it. Years before meeting Jessica, Ethan's father had built a small industrial supply company from nothing. The business struggled during its early years. There were setbacks, economic downturns, lawsuits, near bankruptcies. But Ethan's father refused to quit. Slowly, the company grew, then expanded, then acquired competitors. By the time Ethan graduated college, the business had become one of the largest private industrial corporations in the region. People expected Ethan to immediately take control. He refused. Instead, he spent years learning every level of the business. He worked warehouses, shipping docks, maintenance crews, customer service departments. He wanted to understand how employees lived before making decisions that affected them. His father admired that approach. Many investors did not. When his father passed away unexpectedly, ownership transferred according to a carefully written trust. But Ethan made a surprising choice. Rather than publicly becoming chairman, he placed professional executives in visible leadership positions while maintaining ownership quietly through the holding company. Only a handful of lawyers and board members knew the truth. Everyone else assumed ownership was spread among investors, including Richard Hale. That assumption would eventually become a disaster. But before that happened, Ethan met Jessica. At first, she seemed different. She appeared supportive, kind, ambitious. She admired his work ethic. She claimed she respected simple living. They dated, fell in love, married. Or at least Ethan believed they had. The warning signs appeared gradually. First came complaints about their apartment, then complaints about his car, then complaints about vacations, then complaints about nearly everything. Jessica became increasingly obsessed with appearances. Social media, designer brands, exclusive restaurants, luxury experiences. Every month her expectations grew. Every month her patience shrank. Ethan could have revealed his wealth at any moment, could have shown her the truth, could have solved every financial complaint instantly. But he wanted something more valuable. Trust. He wanted to know she loved him. Not his money, not his status, not his last name. The truth remained hidden, and eventually that decision exposed her real character. The first major crack appeared when Jessica met Richard Hale. Richard was charismatic, confident, and incredibly skilled at convincing people he was more important than he actually was. As CEO, he enjoyed celebrity-like treatment inside the company. Employees admired him. Business magazines praised him. Industry events welcomed him. He loved attention, and attention loved him back. Jessica noticed him immediately. Richard noticed her too. At first, their interactions seemed harmless. Company dinners, networking events, fundraisers. But subtle changes followed. Jessica started comparing Ethan to Richard, comparing lifestyles, comparing careers, comparing income, comparing influence. The comparisons became constant. No matter what Ethan did, he lost. Richard always appeared superior. Eventually, Jessica stopped hiding her disappointment. She openly questioned Ethan's ambition, questioned his future, questioned his ability to provide the life she wanted. Each conversation felt less like a marriage and more like an interview. An interview Ethan kept failing. Meanwhile, Richard encouraged everything. He presented himself as proof that success meant luxury. He filled Jessica's head with promises, private vacations, luxury homes, exclusive memberships, a future filled with status. The deeper she fell into that world, the further she moved from her husband. And then another secret emerged. One Ethan did not know. Richard was not nearly as successful as people believed. Behind closed doors, the company faced growing problems. Expenses were rising. Several acquisitions had failed. Projects were bleeding money. The board had concerns. Financial reports contained inconsistencies. Nothing criminal had been proven. Not yet. But warning signs existed. Victor Lang knew this. As chairman of the board, Victor had spent months reviewing reports. Numbers did not make sense. Transactions appeared unusual. Certain accounts lacked transparency. Every investigation seemed to lead toward Richard, but proving it remained difficult. Then Victor noticed something else. Richard's relationship with Jessica. At first he ignored it. Executives had affairs all the time, unfortunately. But when he learned Jessica was married to Ethan, his concern changed completely. Because Victor knew who Ethan really was, and Richard did not. The realization terrified him. A scandal involving the hidden owner could destabilize the entire company. Victor attempted to warn Richard indirectly, suggested caution, suggested professionalism, suggested avoiding unnecessary personal risks. Richard ignored everything. Success had made him arrogant. He believed he was untouchable. That belief would become his greatest mistake. Weeks before the divorce, Jessica practically stopped pretending. Late nights became normal. Secret phone calls increased. Weekend absences multiplied. The marriage existed only on paper. Still, Ethan remained patient. Not because he was weak. Because he hoped she would eventually choose honesty. Instead, she chose humiliation. Public humiliation. The divorce spectacle at the company event was not spontaneous. Jessica had planned it carefully. Richard helped. They wanted witnesses. They wanted attention. They wanted everyone to see her leave the maintenance worker for the CEO. They wanted applause, validation, envy. And for a brief moment, they got exactly that. After the event ended, employees spent days discussing what happened. Rumors spread rapidly. Most people pitied Ethan. Others mocked him. Several assumed his life was over. Nobody understood the truth. Not yet. But strange things began happening. Quiet things. Small things, the kind of things people ignore until they become impossible to ignore. Victor Lang requested an emergency board review. External auditors received authorization. Financial records were reopened. Transactions from the previous 3 years underwent examination. Meanwhile, Ethan disappeared from public view. He continued working, continued showing up, continued acting as if nothing had changed. That calm behavior unsettled people, especially Jessica. She expected devastation. Instead, she saw peace, and peace made her uncomfortable. Because somewhere deep inside, she began wondering if she had misunderstood something. That feeling grew stronger when Richard started showing cracks. The charming CEO became increasingly stressed. Phone calls arrived at strange hours. Meetings became secretive. Financial discussions turned tense. Several executives suddenly resigned. One auditor reportedly quit after a heated confrontation. Then a witness came forward. An accountant, someone who had spent years processing internal reports. Someone who noticed patterns hidden beneath thousands of transactions. The accountant brought evidence to Victor, evidence that suggested millions of dollars had been diverted through shell companies connected to individuals close to Richard. The discovery shocked the board, but that was not the biggest surprise. The biggest surprise came from a name hidden inside those records. A name Jessica recognized, a name connected to luxury gifts she believed Richard purchased personally. A name connected to expensive vacations. A name connected to designer purchases. Someone else had been funding Richard's lifestyle. Company money. The walls were beginning to crack. And once the first crack appears, collapse is never far behind. Jessica still believed she was stepping into the best years of her life. She had no idea she was actually walking toward the edge of a cliff. And far away from the spotlight, Ethan finally received a call. The board wanted a private meeting. Immediately. Because the investigation had uncovered something even worse than financial misconduct. Something capable of bringing down Richard Hale overnight. Something that would force Ethan to stop hiding. And when that secret became public, Jessica would discover the truth she never bothered to learn about the man she abandoned. The truth was worth far more than every luxury Richard had promised. And the countdown had already begun. The private meeting took place after midnight. No reporters, no executives, no assistants. Only a handful of board members sat around the long conference table. Victor Lang stood near the window. The tension in the room was impossible to ignore. When Ethan entered, every person immediately rose from their seat. The gesture alone would have shocked anyone who knew him only as a maintenance employee. For years, these powerful people had treated him with a level of respect few ever witnessed. Because unlike the rest of the company, they knew exactly who he was. Victor wasted no time. The investigation had uncovered enough evidence to trigger a formal corporate review. Millions of dollars were missing. Several shell companies appeared connected to Richard. Multiple executives had signed documents without understanding their true purpose. The deeper auditors dug, the worse it became. What originally looked like poor management now resembled something far more serious. Corporate fraud. Ethan listened quietly. His expression never changed. The board members expected anger. Instead, they found patience. That patience made them even more nervous. Because calm people were often the most dangerous when pushed too far. Victor then revealed another problem. Richard had recently approved a series of asset transfers, large transfers. Aggressive transfers. Transfers designed to strengthen his personal position inside the company. It was almost as if Richard anticipated trouble, almost as if he believed he could outrun it. But he could not. Because there was one detail he still did not know. One detail that changed everything. Richard believed he was running the company. He believed the board merely advised him. He believed the ownership structure was fragmented. He believed nobody possessed enough authority to remove him quickly. He was wrong. Terribly wrong. Victor finally looked toward Ethan. The board wanted to know if the time had come. The room became silent. Not a single person spoke. Because everyone understood the meaning behind the question. For years, Ethan had remained hidden. For years, he had allowed executives to take public credit. For years, he had avoided attention. But now the company itself was under threat. And if he stayed silent much longer, innocent employees could suffer. Thousands of jobs depended on what happened next. After several moments, Ethan made his decision. The hidden owner would finally step forward. The board approved the plan immediately. A special shareholder meeting was scheduled. Emergency legal reviews were initiated. Independent investigators received full authority. The process had begun. And Richard had no idea. The next morning, Jessica woke up inside a luxury penthouse overlooking the city skyline. Everything looked perfect. Designer furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows, expensive artwork. The exact lifestyle she had always wanted, at least from a distance. Up close, things looked different. Richard barely slept. His temper grew shorter every day. Phone calls interrupted meals. Meetings consumed weekends. Several times she overheard arguments involving lawyers. Whenever she asked questions, Richard dismissed her concerns. He insisted everything was under control. But his behavior told another story. A story he desperately wanted hidden. The first major shock arrived 3 days later. A business magazine published an article questioning company finances. The story spread rapidly. Investors became nervous. Industry analysts demanded answers. Social media exploded with speculation. Richard publicly denied everything. Privately, panic began spreading through executive offices. Several employees suddenly remembered questionable transactions. Former staff members contacted investigators. Anonymous emails arrived daily. Every new piece of information revealed another problem, another inconsistency, another hidden payment. Jessica tried to ignore the growing storm. She convinced herself that powerful people always faced criticism, that successful companies always attracted controversy. That explanation worked. For a while. Then something happened that shattered her confidence. A luxury credit card she frequently used stopped working. At first, she assumed it was a mistake, technical error, a temporary issue. Richard assured her the problem would be fixed, but another card failed the following day. Then another, then another. His frustration became impossible to hide. The man who once appeared untouchable suddenly looked vulnerable. Jessica began noticing things she had ignored before. Collection notices, financial documents, unpaid balances, legal correspondence. Questions multiplied. Answers disappeared. And somewhere in the middle of that uncertainty, she started thinking about Ethan. Not because she missed him. At least that was what she told herself. But because she could not understand one thing. Why had he been so calm? Why had not he fought? Why had not he begged? Why had not he collapsed after losing everything? The question haunted her. Meanwhile, Ethan continued living exactly as before. He drove the same vehicle, wore the same clothes, maintained the same routine. The simplicity confused everyone watching from the outside, particularly one person. A woman named Rachel Morgan. Rachel worked as a senior compliance analyst. Unlike most employees, she paid attention to details, small details, important details. She remembered seeing executives treat Ethan differently during certain private meetings. She remembered security personnel granting him unusual access. She remembered Victor Lang personally greeting him on multiple occasions. At the time, none of it made sense. Now it did. Rachel began connecting dots. And the picture she saw was astonishing. A week later, she received confirmation. Pure accident. A document had been misfiled, only briefly. Only long enough for her to see a name. Ethan Cole, the controlling beneficiary. Rachel stared at the document in disbelief, then checked it again and again. The information was undeniable. The maintenance worker was not simply an employee. He effectively owned the corporation. Her hands trembled. Not because of the money, because of the implications. Jessica had left one of the wealthiest men in the state for an executive who worked for him. The irony felt unreal. Rachel immediately informed Victor. The board already knew disclosure was approaching. Now another witness existed. Another person capable of confirming the truth. The countdown accelerated. Across town, Richard faced a different crisis. Federal investigators had begun asking questions. Lawyers demanded documentation. Banks requested clarification regarding suspicious transfers. One former executive agreed to cooperate. Another prepared testimony. The walls were closing in. Fast. Richard's arrogance slowly transformed into desperation. For the first time in years, he felt genuine fear. Yet he still believed he could survive. Because he still did not know who truly controlled the company. That ignorance became his fatal weakness. Then came the invitation. Every executive received notice of an emergency shareholder assembly. Attendance mandatory. No exceptions. Rumors exploded immediately. Employees sensed something enormous was coming. Nobody knew exactly what. Jessica learned about the meeting through Richard. The stress on his face said everything. He attempted confidence. Failed. Attempted optimism. Failed again. By then even she recognized the truth. Something was terribly wrong. The day of the meeting arrived. The auditorium filled quickly. Executives occupied front rows. Managers sat behind them. Legal representatives lined the walls. Security presence increased significantly. The atmosphere felt less like a business event and more like a courtroom. Richard sat near the stage, trying to appear composed, trying to maintain authority, trying to ignore the knot tightening in his stomach. Jessica sat beside him, watching, waiting, worrying. Victor Lang stepped onto the stage first. Conversations stopped instantly. The chairman's expression was unusually serious. He informed attendees that an independent investigation had uncovered significant violations. Several executives visibly paled. Richard remained still, but only outwardly. Inside, panic erupted. Victor continued. Evidence indicated financial misconduct, breach of fiduciary responsibility, unauthorized transactions, abuse of corporate resources. Each accusation struck harder than the last. Whispers spread through the crowd. Jessica felt her pulse accelerating. Then Victor announced that additional information would be presented by the company's principal owner. The room became confused. Many executives exchanged puzzled looks. Principal owner? Most believed ownership was divided among investors. Nobody understood. Not yet. Victor turned toward the side entrance. And then everything changed. A single figure walked into the auditorium. Simple suit, calm expression, steady pace. No security escort, no dramatic introduction. Just Ethan. For several seconds nobody reacted. The image simply did not make sense. Employees stared. Managers frowned. Executives looked confused. Jessica felt her entire body freeze. Richard looked annoyed, then irritated, then concerned. Victor formally introduced Ethan Cole as the controlling owner and majority beneficiary of the corporation. The room exploded. Gasps, shouts, disbelief. People looked at each other searching for confirmation, searching for logic, searching for any explanation that could make sense of what they had just heard. None existed. Jessica's face lost all color. The realization hit like a freight train. Every complaint, every insult, every comparison, every humiliation, all of it suddenly returned, and every memory became unbearable. She had abandoned her husband because she believed he lacked success, because she believed he lacked ambition, because she believed he could never provide the life she wanted. The truth was infinitely worse. He had possessed everything she wanted all along, but he had never used it to define himself. While she spent years chasing wealth, she had walked away from someone who never needed to prove he had it. Tears formed instantly, not from love, from regret. Pure, devastating regret. Beside her, Richard looked even worse. His confidence vanished, because another realization had arrived. The man he mocked, the man he humiliated, the husband whose marriage he helped destroy, was the owner. His owner. His owner. And judging from the evidence already presented, his future was about to collapse. The auditorium grew silent again. Not the silence from months earlier. This one felt different. This silence belonged to truth. And Ethan had not even begun speaking yet. What happened next would destroy Richard's career, expose every secret, and force Jessica to confront the cost of the choice she could never take back. The silence inside the auditorium felt suffocating. Hundreds of eyes remained fixed on Ethan. Only a few months earlier, many of those same people had walked past him without a second glance. Some barely knew his name. Others assumed he was just another maintenance employee struggling to make ends meet. Now the truth stood in front of them, and it was impossible to ignore. Jessica sat frozen in her chair. The reality refused to settle in. Every memory suddenly looked different. Every conversation, every complaint, every argument. She remembered criticizing Ethan's old car. She remembered questioning his future. She remembered telling friends that he lacked ambition. Now those memories felt like knives. Because the man she considered unsuccessful had quietly controlled a business worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And he had never once used that fact to impress anyone. Not even her. Especially not her. Meanwhile, Richard felt something far worse than embarrassment. Fear. Real fear. The kind that appears when a person realizes the rules have changed. Until that moment, Richard believed he was dealing with a maintenance worker. Now he understood he had been insulting, deceiving, and undermining the owner of the company itself. The owner who had just received detailed reports about financial misconduct. The owner who possessed authority beyond anything Richard could challenge. The owner standing only a few feet away. Victor Lang stepped aside. The stage now belonged to Ethan. The room waited. Many expected anger. Others expected revenge. Some expected humiliation. After all, Richard and Jessica had publicly humiliated him months earlier. Surely this was the moment he would return the favor. But Ethan surprised everyone. He remained calm, measured, controlled. That calmness made the situation even more uncomfortable because it revealed something important. He was not acting out of emotion. He was acting out of responsibility. Ethan explained that he had spent years working throughout the company because he believed leadership required understanding employees. He explained that he had deliberately avoided public recognition. He explained that ownership was never supposed to be about power. It was supposed to be about stewardship. The audience listened carefully. Many employees felt their perception shifting in real time. This was not a wealthy heir chasing attention. This was someone who had intentionally chosen humility, someone who had worked beside them, someone who knew their names, someone who understood their struggles. Then the tone changed. The investigation findings appeared on large screens. Financial records, transfer histories, corporate reports, legal documents. The evidence spoke for itself. Millions of dollars had been redirected through complex networks of shell companies. Corporate resources had been used for personal gain. False reporting concealed losses. Internal controls had been bypassed. Each revelation landed harder than the last. The audience grew increasingly shocked. Some executives lowered their heads. Others stared at the screens in disbelief. Richard's face became pale. His lawyers exchanged nervous glances. The situation was spiraling beyond control. Then came another revelation. One nobody expected. The lead investigator walked onto the stage carrying additional files. The board had initially believed Richard acted alone. That assumption proved incorrect. The investigation uncovered a small group of executives who helped conceal transactions. Several had already agreed to cooperate. Several had already provided testimony. Several had already turned over evidence. And that evidence directly connected Richard to nearly every questionable decision. The room erupted again. This time there was no confusion, only shock. Richard finally stood. For the first time all day he attempted to defend himself. He claimed the reports were misleading. He argued that financial decisions were being misrepresented. He insisted that context was missing. But every explanation collapsed under scrutiny. The investigators had prepared thoroughly. Every claim met documentation. Every denial met evidence. Every excuse met facts. The deeper the discussion went, the worse things became. Then a familiar face appeared. Rachel Morgan, the compliance analyst, the witness. She calmly described the irregularities she had observed over the years. Missing approvals, unusual transactions, pressure placed on employees to ignore concerns, patterns that never made sense. Her testimony reinforced everything investigators had discovered. Richard watched helplessly. The foundation beneath him was disappearing. One piece at a time, and then another witness emerged. A former finance executive. Someone who had resigned months earlier. Someone Richard believed would remain silent forever. The executive described private meetings, secret instructions, methods used to disguise losses, methods used to inflate performance numbers, methods used to maintain Richard's image as a successful CEO. The testimony devastated whatever credibility remained. Jessica felt sick, not because of the financial crimes, because she suddenly realized something much more personal. Richard had lied about almost everything. The expensive lifestyle, the luxury gifts, the extravagant vacations. Many had been funded through money that never belonged to him. The image she admired was not real. It had been purchased with deception. The successful CEO she left her husband for was little more than a carefully constructed illusion. That realization hurt more than she expected, because it forced her to confront a painful truth. She had not chosen Richard because of love. She had chosen what she thought Richard represented. Status, wealth, prestige, and now all three were collapsing in front of her eyes. The meeting ended with immediate consequences. Richard Hale was terminated, effective immediately. His executive authority was revoked. His access privileges were suspended. Independent legal action would proceed. Federal authorities would receive complete cooperation. Security officers approached quietly. Nobody needed to create a scene. The evidence had already done that. The former CEO left the auditorium under the watchful eyes of everyone he once commanded. No applause followed. No sympathy emerged. Only silence, the kind reserved for fallen men. Jessica remained seated long after everyone else began leaving. She could not move, could not think, could not breathe normally. Months earlier, she walked into a company event believing she was leaving a failure behind. Now she sat alone watching the consequences of that decision unfold. And for the first time, she understood something. The greatest loss was not financial. The greatest loss was Ethan. Because unlike Richard, Ethan's character had been real. His kindness had been real. His loyalty had been real. His integrity had been real. And she had thrown it away. Days passed. News coverage intensified. Business publications reported on the scandal. Industry analysts examined the investigation. Former employees shared stories. The public exposure became impossible to contain. Richard's reputation deteriorated rapidly. Civil lawsuits followed. Regulatory inquiries expanded. Financial institutions severed relationships. Former allies disappeared. People who once praised him suddenly distanced themselves. The fall was swift. But it was not over, because investigators uncovered something else. Something that transformed the scandal from corporate misconduct into potential criminal liability. Several shell companies connected to Richard had transferred money internationally. The transactions raised serious concerns. Federal investigators expanded their review. New subpoenas were issued. Additional witnesses came forward. The situation became dramatically worse. Meanwhile, Ethan focused on protecting employees. That decision surprised many observers. Most expected him to focus exclusively on punishment. Instead, he prioritized stability. Jobs were protected. Departments were reorganized. Employee benefits were preserved. Operational transparency increased. The company began recovering. Slowly, steadily, responsibly. Employees noticed. Respect grew rapidly. Not because Ethan was wealthy, because he acted like a leader. Months after the shareholder meeting, morale throughout the company reached levels not seen in years. People trusted management again. They trusted the future again. And they trusted Ethan. Across the city, Jessica faced a very different reality. The luxury penthouse disappeared. The invitations disappeared. The social circle disappeared. Many people who once celebrated her relationship with Richard suddenly stopped calling. The glamorous life she chased evaporated almost overnight. What remained was regret. Every morning, every evening, every quiet moment, regret. She began seeing Ethan's true value only after losing him. A mistake millions of people make, but few make on such a spectacular scale. Eventually, she requested a meeting, not because she expected reconciliation. Deep down, she knew that possibility was gone. She simply wanted a chance to speak, a chance to explain, a chance to apologize. Whether she deserved that opportunity was another question entirely. And when Ethan finally agreed to meet, neither of them knew that one final conversation would determine how this story truly ended. What Jessica said next would reveal whether her regret came from losing a wealthy man or losing a genuinely good one. The meeting took place nearly 8 months after the divorce. No luxury restaurant, no expensive hotel, no dramatic setting. Jessica found Ethan sitting at a small cafe near a public park. The simplicity immediately caught her attention. It was exactly the kind of place he had always liked, the kind of place she used to criticize. For a moment, neither spoke. Not because there was nothing to say, because there was too much. Jessica looked older, not physically, emotionally. The confidence that once bordered on arrogance had disappeared. The certainty that guided her decisions was gone. Life had humbled her, painfully. Ethan remained calm, the same calmness that had frustrated her during the divorce. The same calmness that had confused her after the reveal. Same calmness that now made her realize how much she had misunderstood him. Jessica finally apologized. Not with dramatic tears. Not with excuses. Not with attempts to rewrite history. She admitted that she had become obsessed with appearances. She admitted that she had measured people by status. She admitted that she had mistaken wealth for character. And she admitted something else. The hardest truth of all. She had not truly seen Ethan. For years, she looked at him without understanding him. She saw what he drove, what he wore, what he earned. But she never paid attention to who he was. That failure had cost her everything. Ethan listened quietly. When she finished, he thanked her for the honesty. But his response carried no anger, and somehow that hurt more. Because anger can sometimes be repaired. Indifference cannot. Jessica realized that the man sitting across from her had already moved forward. The wound had healed. The chapter had closed. There would be no reunion, no second chance, No dramatic reconciliation. Real life rarely works that way. Some mistakes permanently alter the future. This was one of them. As the conversation ended, Jessica asked a question that had haunted her for months. Why had he hidden the truth? Why had he never told her who he really was? The answer arrived without hesitation. Because he wanted to be loved for himself. Not for what he owned. Not for what he could buy. Not for what he could provide. For himself. The answer silenced her. Because deep down, she knew she had failed that test. And no amount of regret could change it now. When they parted ways, Ethan wished her well. Nothing more. Nothing less. Jessica watched him walk away. And for the first time, she fully understood what she had lost. Not a wealthy husband. Not a powerful businessman. Not a successful owner. She lost a good man. And those are far harder to replace. Months later, Richard Hale's legal troubles reached their conclusion. The investigation uncovered years of misconduct, financial fraud, corporate theft, false reporting, abuse of authority. The evidence proved overwhelming. Witnesses testified. Documents confirmed transactions. Digital records filled in the remaining gaps. Justice moved slowly, but it moved. Eventually, Richard received the consequences he had spent years avoiding. His career ended. His reputation collapsed. His name became associated with one of the largest corporate scandals in the region's history. The executives who helped him faced consequences as well. Some lost professional licenses. Some faced civil liability. Others disappeared from corporate leadership entirely. The system had finally caught up. Not through revenge, through evidence. Exactly as it should. Meanwhile, Ethan focused on rebuilding. The company expanded responsibly. Employee satisfaction improved. Community investment programs grew. Training initiatives opened opportunities for hundreds of workers. Under his leadership, profits increased. But more importantly, trust increased. That mattered far more to him. One afternoon, nearly 2 years after the divorce, Ethan attended the opening of a new vocational training center funded by the company. The project had been his idea. Many of the students came from difficult backgrounds. Some struggled financially. Some lacked opportunities. Simply needed someone to believe in them. As Ethan walked through the facility, employees greeted him warmly. Students thanked him. Families expressed gratitude. The appreciation felt genuine. Because it was. Nothing had been purchased. Nothing had been manipulated. Nothing had been forced. Respect had been earned. Victor Lang watched from nearby. The elderly chairman smiled. Years earlier, he had worried that revealing Ethan's identity might destroy the very qualities that made him unique. Instead, the opposite happened. The truth simply allowed others to see what had always been there. Character, integrity, leadership. The qualities money could never buy. Before leaving, Victor shared one final observation. Many people spend their lives trying to look successful. Very few spend their lives trying to be successful. Richard spent years building an image. Ethan spent years building a foundation. And when the storm arrived, only one remained standing. The lesson lingered long after the conversation ended. Across the city, Jessica occasionally saw news articles about Ethan's achievements, new company initiatives, community programs, business growth. She no longer felt bitterness, only reflection. Life had taught her a painful lesson. The most valuable things are often hidden beneath ordinary appearances, and the people who seem least impressive at first glance sometimes possess the greatest worth. By then, she had rebuilt parts of her own life. She worked hard, lived modestly, made better choices. The regret never disappeared completely, but it became a reminder rather than a prison, a reminder to value character over status, truth over appearance, substance over image. As for Ethan, he eventually found happiness again. Not immediately, not dramatically, simply and naturally. The way genuine things often happen. The person who entered his life cared little about wealth. She admired his kindness, respected his humility, appreciated his values. The connection grew slowly, built on honesty rather than illusion, exactly the way he always wanted. Years later, few people remembered the details of the scandal. The headlines faded, the gossip disappeared, the rumors died. But one story remained. Employees still shared it with new hires. Investors occasionally referenced it. Board members never forgot it. The story of a maintenance worker who was not really a maintenance worker. The story of a CEO who believed power belonged to him. The story of a wife who traded loyalty for luxury. And the story of a truth that eventually surfaced. Because truth has a strange habit. It waits, quietly, patiently, then arrives when nobody expects it. Jessica thought she was leaving behind a man with no future. Richard thought he was humiliating someone beneath him. Both made the same mistake. They judged a person by appearances, and appearances can be deceiving, especially when the quiet man in the maintenance uniform happens to own the company. In the end, the wealth was not the lesson. The ownership was not the lesson. The downfall was not the lesson. The lesson was simpler. Character reveals itself when nobody is watching, and sooner or later, every person receives exactly what that character has earned. Richard earned exposure. Jessica earned regret. Ethan earned respect. And respect, unlike money, cannot be taken away. The room that once witnessed his humiliation eventually became the place where his truth was revealed. The people who once overlooked him eventually stood to applaud him. The company he quietly protected continued to thrive, and the life he built through integrity became something far more valuable than revenge. It became proof. Proof that kindness is not weakness, humility is not failure, and the people most underestimated by the world are sometimes the ones holding everything together. That should have been impossible, but it happened, and that changed everything.